My mom's family loves dominoes, specifically Double 12 Mexican Train. To play Mexican Train, you need game pieces, little colored trains to run the lines, and a hub in the center from which the lines branch. This is my grandma, by the way. She turns 95 this year.
Okay, no. Okay, no.
My mother's visiting, so I decided to make her a Mexican train set. The first step was to get some dominoes and take some measurements for the hub piece. I couldn't find a train model that I liked online, so I decided to model it myself. I'm using Tinkercad because I'm a novice and I don't want to spend time learning professional tools. Sue me. I have a 3D printer, but I don't want to give my mom 3D printed plastic junk. I want something that'll last, so the plan is to make the game pieces from epoxy resin. I'll need to use 3D printed trains, from which I'm going to make a mold, into which I'll pour the resin. I'm trying to ensure that the pieces here print well and mold well. That means I'm avoiding any large overhangs and adding slopes to allow bubbles to escape wherever possible.
It's not bad. A little taller than I think I'd like.
I wasn't super happy with the first print, so I made a few changes. Namely, I made the pieces a little more squat, and the rear of the train looked a little flat, so I cut a little detail into it. And they printed pretty well. Next up is the line hub. This thing needs to hold a domino and have spokes for the domino lines. The hub also needs to be small enough to fit in this antique train tin that I purchased to hold the game pieces. That means it'll need to be a little bit smaller than I'd like, but I'll make it work. The plan is I'll suspend the train pieces by rafters over a 3D printed tub that I can fill with silicone rubber. I also made a lid because I don't trust my cats. There are separate tubs with separate rafters for the hub and the train pieces. Once everything is printed, it's time to start making the mold. I start by using a small soldering iron to weld the hub and the train forms to the rafters so that I can suspend them over their respective tubs. Once everything's in place, it's time to mix the silicone. In hindsight, I probably should have worn gloves. I got some on me and that stuff itches. I think it probably has a bunch of heavy metals in it too, which isn't great, but the bigger problem was the itching when it dried on my skin. I also made the incredibly silly mistake of using a glass jar to measure the resin when I had a bajillion plastic cups that wouldn't have needed cleaning afterwards and would have worked just as well. Once the resin is in the tubs, I noticed that some of it seemed to be leaking, so I decided to wrap them in plastic while they set. I think this might make them set a little bit slower since they can't exchange air as well, but that's fine. A couple of days later, when it was time to remove the molds from their tubs, too much of the silicone had leaked through the plastic tubs, and the molds just weren't tall enough to reach the rafters. The print wasn't exactly watertight. I didn't think it would need to be. I also had to completely destroy the tubs to get at the molds, which wasn't exactly ideal. So plan B, we're going to redesign the tubs with removable walls so that it's easier to remove them from the mold, and to reuse the tubs when I do the epoxy pouring step. One set of prints later, and it's time for take two. This time I'm laying a base of aluminum foil in the tubs to prevent leaks. I also made the tubs a little bit deeper so that if the rafters warp, it'll be less of an issue. I'm welding the sides of the tub so that they're more stable, but thanks to the aluminum foil, I don't need it to be watertight anymore. I'm taking a moment here to point out a small potential issue with the train volumes. The smokestack and the cab both go to the top, meaning that there will be a space between, which will be filled with the silicone mold. That means that I'll need to break off the smokestack when I remove the print from the mold. And I'll need to cut into the mold between the cab and the smokestack when I remove the final epoxy part. I don't want to suspend the train volumes in any other orientation, and I think it should be fine this way, so I'm rolling with it. Once everything is assembled, welded, and suspended, it's time for the silicone rubber. This time, I decided to be smart and wear gloves. I think this stuff says to measure by weight, but I'm measuring by volume because I'm a rebel who doesn't follow instructions. I'm making a point of overfilling the molds a little bit this time, just in case of leaks, and I'm wrapping them in plastic again, just in case of leaks, even though I think the silicone rubber shouldn't contain acetic acid or anything that I think might react with the aluminum, but I also don't know what's in this stuff, so I'm being careful. A couple of days later, after everything is set, it's time to cut the molds free from their tubs and remove the volumes. And let me just say, this was the most satisfying step. Just listen to that. Removing all the train volumes took a minute, as expected, but just listen. Once that's done, I rebuild the tubs and get ready to prepare a bunch of batches of the epoxy resin. I've got 2 sets of dye here, a clear dye that's suspended in liquid, and a more opaque solid powder dye that glows in the dark. I'm hoping that the powder dye doesn't dissolve and that it'll give the final piece a sparkling glowy texture in the dark. I'm using these tweezers to poke holes in the mold. Bubbles kept forming up by the front of the train that I just couldn't shake out, so I was trying to poke holes in the rubber mold to let the air escape. Kinda worked, kinda didn't. A couple of days later, and I have some very pretty epoxy pieces. As I expected, I had to cut the mold to remove them in one piece, but they came out great, excepting a couple of bubbles in a few places. Unfortunately, the hub was left to sit on an incline and didn't come out right. I also wasn't happy with the color, so I decided to try again. The second time, the part came out with the correct shape, but the color was a little greener than I had hoped, so I ended up spray painting it black off camera to get the color I liked. I also coated the pieces in a layer of clear coat epoxy. I was running short on time, so the clear coat was still off-gassing when I gave it to my mom. Hopefully she didn't notice the smell. Once it's been left out for a day, the smell should go away, so it's fine. Anyways, here's the final result. It all fits nicely in the tin, as I intended, and the hub is perfectly sized to hold the wooden dominoes from the set. I am pretty happy with these results. Chris, in your previous video, you asked me just an absolute litany of questions. What my favorite experiences are this year, what challenges I faced, how I've responded to those challenges, and what kind of ridiculous art I'll make. You asked me to leave my responses in the comments, but 1, that's too many questions to answer in a single comment. 2, I could hurt someone's feelings if I declaimed my greatest challenges publicly. And 3, I'm a rebel who doesn't follow instructions. Besides, you made it this far in the video, I think you already know what sort of ridiculous art I'm making. Instead, I'll try to address the themes of your video by giving you a moment of silence with this cat. I hope that answered any questions you might have.
Boom, 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 boom. Scoopity-dee-bop.
I got egg rolls.